the heart of the Roman Empire, the Colosseum was a symbol of power, fear, and entertainment. For the masses, it was a place where legends were born and where the lust for blood and glory was sated. Among the thousands who had fought in the sands, none had risen as swiftly or as remarkably as Alexander, a slave who had known nothing but hardship since his capture as a child. Born in a distant province, Alexander was taken from his family when he was only 8 years old, sold into slavery and trained to be a gladiator. The years of brutal training hardened him, shaping him from a boy into a warrior who would one day become the most feared and celebrated gladiator in all of Rome. Despite the chains that bound him, Alexander harbored a burning desire for freedom, and he knew that his only path to it lay through the arena. His rise to fame began when he was pitted against 3 veteran gladiators in a match that was meant to be his death, but Alexander fought with a ferocity and skill that shocked the crowd. He defeated the opponents with a blend of raw strength, agility, and an almost supernatural ability to predict their moves. That day, he earned the nickname the Lion of Rome. As his victories mounted, so did his fame. The people of Rome chanted his name, and the emperor himself began to take notice. The more he won, the more privileges he was granted. He was allowed finer food, better quarters, and even the company of women. But Alexander knew that these were just mere distractions, designed to keep him loyal to the empire and away from the thoughts of rebellion. Despite his rising status, Alexander remained a slave, bound by the whims of his master, Senator Quintus, a powerful and ruthless man who saw Alexander as nothing more than a tool for his own advancement. Quintus lavished praise upon Alexander, but his promise of freedom always came with conditions. One more victory, one more show of loyalty. Alexander's heart was heavy with the knowledge that each fight brought him closer to the day when he would no longer be able to avoid the emperor's gaze. He knew that the more glory he gained, the more of a pawn he became in the emperor and Quintus's political games. But what choice did he have? To refuse was to die in disgrace. To continue was to risk everything in pursuit of a freedom that seemed ever more elusive. As he prepared for the biggest match of his life, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that he was caught in a trap, one that was tightening around him with every step he took toward the Colosseum center. The day of the grand match had arrived, and all of Rome was abuzz with excitement. The Colosseum was filled to the brim with citizens, nobles, and dignitaries, all eager to witness the spectacle. In the emperor's box, a lavishly adorned seat awaited the ruler of the known world, surrounded by advisors, senators, and members of the imperial family. Among them sat Senator Quintus, his eyes gleaming with ambition as he glanced at the emperor. Alexander stood in the dimly lit chambers beneath the Colosseum, preparing for battle. The clamor of the crowd above was a constant roar, but here, in the bowels of the arena, it was eerily quiet. He strapped on his armor with the practiced ease of a seasoned fighter, but his mind was elsewhere. He knew that this match was different. It was not just about survival, it was about the favor of the emperor. Senator Quintus had made it clear to Alexander that victory today would secure him a place in the emperor's good graces, and with it, the possibility of freedom. But there was an unspoken understanding between them. If Alexander failed, he would be discarded and the emperor's attention would turn elsewhere. For Quintus, Alexander was a means to an end, and that end was power. As Alexander walked toward the arena's entrance, he was met by the unexpected visitor, the emperor's personal envoy. The man handed Alexander a golden laurel wreath, a symbol of the emperor's favor, and a message: impress the emperor today, and your name will be etched in the annals of history. Fail, and you'll be forgotten. With the weight of the emperor's expectations bearing down on him, Alexander stepped into the blinding sunlight of the arena. The deafening roar of the crowd washed over him, and he could see the emperor seated in his grand box, watching intently. Quintus sat beside him, a smug smile on his lips as if victory was already assured. The gates on the opposite side of the arena creaked open, and Alexander's opponent emerged, a giant of a man, a former champion from a distant land, known for his brutality and strength. The crowd's cheers grew louder as the two gladiators faced each other, weapons drawn, each ready to kill or be killed. The battle that followed was fierce and bloody, a clash of titans that had left the crowd on the edge of their seats. Alexander fought with everything he had, using his agility and cunning to outmaneuver his opponent. But as the fight dragged on, he could feel his strength waning, and doubt began to creep in his mind. Was this what glory felt like? The struggle, the pain, the knowledge that his life was at the mercy of others? In the end, it was not brute force that had won the day, but a calculated move that caught his opponent off guard. With a swift and decisive strike, Alexander delivered the final blow, and the Colosseum erupted into cheers. The emperor stood applauding, and Quintus' smile widened. But as Alexander stood victorious, he realized that the glory he had gained came at a cost. The emperor's favor was not a gift, it was a chain, one that bound him even more tightly to the will of those in power. And as he looked up at the emperor's box, he understood that his true battle was only just beginning. In the weeks following his victory, Alexander became the talk of Rome. His name was on the lips of every citizen, and the stories of his prowess in the arena grew more grandiose with each retelling. The emperor, pleased with the spectacle Alexander had provided, granted him a lavish banquet in his honor, attended by Rome's most powerful and influential figures. At the banquet, Alexander was paraded before the guests like a prized possession. Senators, generals, and wealthy patriarchs all vied for his attention, each eager to align themselves with the man who had captured the emperor's favor. But as Alexander moved through the crowd, accepting praise and toasts in his honor, he felt a growing sense of unease. The more they lauded him, the more he realized that his newfound glory was a gilded cage. Senator Quintus, ever the opportunist, took every opportunity to remind Alexander of the debt he owed for his rise to fame. "Remember, Alexander," Quintus would say, his voice dripping with false camaraderie, "your success is tied to mine. The emperor's favor is fickle, and it is only through me that you secure your place in history." Alexander knew that Quintus was right. His victories had earned him the emperor's attention, but they had also made him a pawn in a larger game of power and politics. Quintus saw Alexander not as a man, but as a tool to further his own ambitions, and the more Alexander realized this, the more he began to question the true cost of the glory he had sought. As the days passed, Alexander's discomfort grew. He was granted privileges beyond those of any other gladiator, fine clothes, exquisite food, and the company of Rome's most beautiful women. But these luxuries only served to remind him of the chains that bound him. He was still a slave, and his freedom was as elusive as ever. One evening, as Alexander walked through the streets of Rome, he encountered a group of beggars huddled around the fire. Their faces were gaunt, their clothes tattered, and their eyes hollow with despair. They looked up at him with a mixture of fear and awe, recognizing him as a famed gladiator who had won the emperor's favor. As he looked into their eyes, Alexander saw a reflection of his own soul, trapped, desperate, and yearning for something more. He realized that the glory he had achieved was a hollow victory, one that he had done nothing to free him from the chains that bound him. In fact, it had only tightened him. That night, Alexander returned to his quarters with a heavy heart. The cheers of the crowd, the praise of the emperor, the riches and luxuries, all of it felt meaningless in the face of the suffering he had witnessed. He knew that if he had to continue down this path, he would lose himself completely, becoming nothing more than a tool in the hands of men like Quintus. And so, as he lay in bed staring up at the ceiling, Alexander made a vow. He would no longer seek glory for its own sake. Instead, he would find a way to break free from the chains that bound him, to reclaim his soul and his freedom. But he knew that this would not be easy, and that the path ahead would be fraught with danger and sacrifice. Alexander's resolve to break free from the chains of glory was put to the test almost immediately. As his fame continued to grow, so did the demands placed upon him by the senator Quintus and the emperor. He was forced into more and more brutal matches, each one designed to solidify his status as the greatest gladiator Rome had ever seen. But with each victory, Alexander felt the weight of the decision growing heavier. The more he fought, the more he realized that the true battle was not in the arena, but within himself. The glory he had once sought so desperately had become a prison, one that was slowly eroding his spirit. He longed for the freedom to live his life on his own terms, but he knew that this would not be possible as long as he remained a pawn in the emperor's game. One day, after a particularly grueling match, Alexander was approached by a fellow gladiator, a man named Titius. Titius was older, battle-scarred, and wise in the ways of the world. He had seen many gladiators rise to the fame and fall just as quickly, and he recognized the turmoil in Alexander's eyes. "You're different from the others," Titius said, his voice low and gruff. "You fight with a purpose, not just for the thrill of it. I can see it in you. Be careful, Alexander. The more you rise, the harder they'll try to keep you down." Alexander nodded, knowing that Titius spoke the truth. He had already seen how Quintus manipulated him, using his fame to gain favor with the emperor and the senate. But what Titius said next surprised him. "There's a way out," Titius continued, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous light. "A group of us, gladiators, slaves, even some soldiers, were planning something. A rebellion. A chance to take back our freedom. But we need someone like you to lead us." The idea of rebellion had never crossed Alexander's mind. He had always believed that his only path to freedom was through the arena, by earning the emperor's favor. But as Titius spoke, Alexander began to see the truth. The system was rigged against him, and the only way to truly break free was to tear it down. But rebellion was a dangerous game, one that could cost him everything: his life, his legacy, even the lives of those he cared about. Alexander hesitated, torn between his desire for freedom and the fear of what might happen if he failed. Titius seemed to sense his hesitation. "Think about it," he said, "but don't take too long. The longer you wait, the tighter those chains will get." The night, as Alexander lay in his quarters, he could not stop thinking about Titius' words. The idea of rebellion was tempting, but it was also terrifying. He had seen what happened to those who defied the emperor: crucifixion, torture, death. But as he thought about the chains that bound him, the hollow victory of his glory, he knew that he could not continue down this path. In the end, Alexander made his decision. He would join the rebellion, not for glory, not for fame, but for the one thing he had always wanted: freedom. The rebellion began in the dead of night, under the cover of darkness. Alexander, Titus, and a small band of gladiators and slaves gathered in a secluded part of the city, far from the watchful eyes of the emperor and his guards. The plan was simple. It was strike at the heart of the empire, taking control of key positions and rallying the people to their causes. But as they prepared to move, Alexander knew that this would not be no easy fight. The emperor's forces were vast and well trained, and any misstep could lead to the swift defeat. But there was no turning back now. The die had been cast, and Alexander was ready to lead his comrades into battle. The first skirmish took place at the gladiators' barracks, where the rebels freed the fellow fighters and armed themselves with weapons taken from the armory. The guards, caught off guard by the sudden attack, were quickly overwhelmed. With each victory, more and more gladiators and slaves joined the rebellion, swelling the ranks and giving them the strength they needed to take on the emperor's forces. As the rebellion spread, the streets of Rome erupted into chaos. Citizens inspired by the gladiators' courage began to rise up against the tyranny of the emperor. The city was engulfed in the flames, and the sound of battle echoed through the night. But the emperor was not one to be easily defeated. He quickly mobilized his legions, sending them to crush the rebellion with ruthless efficiency. The final battle took place in the shadow of the Colosseum, the very place where Alexander had earned his fame and glory. The fighting was brutal, with neither side willing to give an inch. Alexander fought with everything he had, his sword flashing in the firelight as he cut down enemy after enemy. But as the battle raged on, he began to see the futility of it all. The city was burning, and the people he had sworn to protect were caught in the crossfire. In the end, it was Titus who made the ultimate sacrifice. Seeing that they were surrounded, he ordered Alexander and the remaining rebels to retreat, staying behind to hold off the advancing legions. As Alexander watched his friend fight to the death, he felt a deep sense of sorrow and guilt. The rebellion had cost them dearly, and the freedom they had sought was still out of reach. But as he and the surviving rebels fled the city, Alexander knew that the battle was not over. The seeds of rebellion had been planted, and the people of Rome had tasted the possibility of freedom. The emperor may have won that day, but the fight for liberty would continue. In the end, Alexander realized that true glory was not the victories won on the battlefield, but the courage to fight for what was right even when the odds were against you. He had lost everything: his fame, his comrades, the city, but he had gained something far more valuable: the knowledge that he had fought for a cause greater than himself. As he looked back at the burning city, Alexander made a vow. He would continue to fight, not for glory, but for the freedom of his people. And no matter how long it took, he would see the empire brought to its knees.